What did I read last week? What did Comics Kid 2099 read last week? Last week I read quite a bit of stuff, actually. A lot of superhero stuff from non-Marvel and DC companies. I am a huge fan of whenever a creator, maybe they've had a little bit of experience working at Marvel or DC or both, and then they want to try their hand at their very own creator-owned superhero stuff. I always like it whenever I can find just really well-told superhero stories. That's something that I don't want to say that it's a rarity now, but it seems like a lot of the stuff at Marvel or DC is part of a larger whole. It serves the corporate desire as opposed to just stories that a small-time creator wants to tell. And I feel like that's something that didn't happen as much, say, 20 or 30 years ago, but it happens a lot more now at Marvel and DC. And so sometimes I really like finding superhero comics from not the big two companies and just reading and enjoying some fun, somewhat wholesome superhero stories. And that was a lot of what I read last week, starting with the first 3 volumes of Chris, I'm probably going to mispronounce his last name, Giarrusso's G-Man series. There are 3 main volumes of this series, and then there is a journal volume that I guess is kind of like a Diary of a Wimpy Kid. I have not read the journal volume. I've never even seen it before. I only found out that it existed last week whenever I was reading the series, and I looked it up to see if there were any other volumes that I was missing. But the first 3 volumes, the first volume is, I think, the weakest of the 3 that I've read. It sets up the origin of G-Man and his older brother Great-Man, and then you get a few little short stories, some of them as short as 1 page long, and then you get another story that has them going through an alternate dimension hijinks, and it's fun, it's cute. If you have kids who are wanting to get into superhero stories, this is definitely one that you can give to your kids. The next 2 volumes, I think, are much better, and that's not to say that volume 1 is bad, that's just to say that volume 2 and 3 are really, really good. I really enjoyed both of these. They are, for the most part, still appropriate for your children. I think there was one moment in volume 2 or 3, I don't remember which one, there was something that I was like, ooh, that's a little, it's a line that I wouldn't necessarily put in a child-appropriate book, but other people might feel differently. I don't even remember exactly what the scenario was, but other than that, these are still appropriate for your children, but they're not dumbed down for your kids. They are clever enough that someone my age and older probably will still enjoy these books, but your kid who's wanting to get into these superhero books will also enjoy them. And I'm really sad that Chris Giarrusso, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, that he has not done more in this world. This is part of the Image Comics shared superhero universe, and I put that in very loose quotes because you'll have Savage Dragon, he shows up in this series, but then something might happen in Savage Dragon where the world might literally blow up, and that won't have any impact on what's going on in Giarrusso's G-Man series. So it's a very loose shared universe where Savage Dragon might show up here, but then if something huge happens in Savage Dragon, that's not going to affect the continuity of the G-Man series. But anyway, this series, I would say it's aimed at 12-year-olds and older, but I'm 28 and I really liked it. So I think that just about anyone can read this series. I really love the mythology that he built here. There's a lot of interesting stuff here. Some of these characters, at first glance, you might think, okay, this is just going to be a Batman knockoff or a Superman knockoff or whatever. He doesn't really do that with any of these characters. He pretty much gives most of them interesting origins and interesting concepts for powers that a lot of times for something like this, a lot of people might just settle for, okay, I'm just going to make this guy a Green Lantern type character or a Martian Manhunter type character. He doesn't really do that here. The closest he comes is this one organization, the Star Corps, I think is what they're called, and they are very similar to the Nova Corps from Marvel Comics, but I think that's forgivable because all these other characters, they don't fall into a typical archetype that you usually see in superhero books. But I really love this series, and I would recommend these 3 volumes to anybody who just wants to read some fun superhero stories. Maybe you want to expose your kid to superheroes, maybe you want to read superhero stuff with them. That would be really great if you wanted to do that. So really like these, and I really wish that there was more from this world world that Giarrusso was doing. And then the next batch of books that I read were all set in Robert Kirkman's Invincible universe. And again, somewhat tied to the larger Image Comics superhero universe. Once again, in Kirkman and Ottley and Walker's Invincible series, Savage Dragon and Super Patriot, they will show up every now and then in that series. But then if something happened in Erik Larsen's Savage Dragon, like if the world exploded, which I feel like that happened once, maybe I'm misremembering, but if something like that happened, then that wouldn't necessarily have any impact on what's going on in Invincible or any of the spin-off books from Invincible. And I read several spin-off books set in the world of Invincible. I read Invincible Presents Atom Eve and Rexplode. I read Guardians of the Globe Volume 1. I believe it was titled Guarding the Globe. I read Invincible Universe Presents Volumes 1 and 2. And I read Tech Jacket Volume 1. Tech Jacket is actually technically not a spin-off of Invincible, but it is set in that same world. Later on in the Invincible series, when Invincible and several of his friends went to go stage a war against the Viltrumites, Tech Jacket was one of the characters who went with them. So he is part of that world, and I like that volume quite a bit. It feels a lot like, I guess, kind of like Blue Beetle, the Jaime Reyes Blue Beetle, who I've never read a whole lot with him, but it's an alien entity that has strapped itself onto this teenager who is trying to live a normal life, and then once this event happens, he's pretty much given up on living a normal life, which is kind of the opposite of what you usually see with the teenage superhero archetype. Pretty much since Spider-Man in the early 60s, every teenage superhero who has come along since then pretty much follows the mold set by Spider-Man, where they are doing the superhero thing, but they're also trying to balance their classes and having a girlfriend or a boyfriend and trying to keep the secret from their parents, stuff like that, that you would see in the Silver Age Spider-Man books. Pretty much none of that is present here in Tech Jacket, which was kind of refreshing. Tech Jacket almost immediately tells his dad about his secret, and then it's like once this happens to him, he doesn't care about any of the teenage stuff that was going on in his life beforehand. In the first issue, he's trying to walk this girl home. He kind of has a crush on her, and then she kind of blows him off at the last minute, and then once he gets the Tech Jacket, later she tries to apologize to him, and he very clearly just isn't thinking about her anymore. It's not like he's mad at her. He literally is just got a lot more on his plate now that he didn't have a day earlier. And so that's very interesting that Kirkman is taking this in a direction where I don't know if he's purposely trying to avoid going in the route that the Silver Age Spider-Man went, but I think that that's an interesting way to handle this series. And I don't know if this series got canceled and then got relaunched much later on, because in the back of this book, Kirkman was talking about how they canceled the series around issue 6 or 7, I think, and then he said he was hoping that they could get along to doing more of this series later on. Well, I looked it up on Amazon. There are at least 4 volumes of Tech Jacket. So maybe after the popularity of Invincible, maybe they decided to do more Tech Jacket. I'm not sure. But this is all that I've read with Tech Jacket so far, and it's a nice primer for the character. I really liked it, and I'm interested in reading more about this character and seeing more of what's going on in his corner of the Kirkman universe. And then the rest of these books are definitely their spin-offs of Invincible. Rexplode and Atom Eve, that was actually 2 separate minis, both of which kind of explore the origins of these 2 characters, which when we first meet these characters in Invincible, they've already been superheroes for a little while, so it's not necessarily important that you read this in order to read Invincible, but I think that it does provide a lot of nice backstory that, while it wasn't necessary, it is pleasant to read about it. That's not the right word. It was fun and enjoyable to read about it. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I really like this book quite a bit. I like getting to see that even Atom Eve, who was portrayed a little bit more seriously than Rexplode was in Invincible, even she has some demons in her closet that you didn't know about whenever you were reading Invincible. Both these characters, Rexplode especially, they seemed kind of minor and insignificant in the grand scheme of things in Invincible. And I know Atom Eve, she later becomes Invincible's girlfriend, but even she, we didn't know a whole lot about her whenever we were getting to know her in Invincible. She talked a little bit about her parents and how she had a struggling relationship with them. We get to see how that develops in this miniseries, and I think this does a really good job fleshing out both of these characters who were not that important in the overall series of Invincible, at least in what I've read in Invincible. But I really like that miniseries. And then we had 3 books that all focused on the Guardians of the Globe. We had Guarding the Globe, and that was one of 2 volumes of a series called Guardians of the Globe, and then for some reason they ended that series, and then they started a new series called Invincible Universe, and that was also about the Guardians of the Globe. And this was really fun. The Guardians of the Globe is one of those examples of a superhero group that was very clearly based on existing superheroes. I talked about that with G-Man, how none of those characters were really modeled after existing characters from Marvel or DC. Well, in the first 6 or 7 issues of Invincible, we were introduced to the Guardians of the Globe, who are very clearly the Justice League of America. You have a Martian Manhunter, an Aquaman, a Batman, we have Omni-Man, who is Mark's dad, Invincible's dad, and then we have War Woman, we have, I think, the Red Streak or something like that. These guys are all very clearly the Justice League. And then, spoilers for the first 6 or 7 issues of Invincible. If you haven't read Invincible, that series just ended very recently, but you may not be familiar with the spoilers, so as long as my thumb is up, I'm going to be spoiling stuff from Invincible. But then Invincible's father kills the Guardians of the Globe, and then they are all completely wiped out. And then as Invincible keeps going on, the government decides to recreate the Guardians of the Globe, except this time they do it with characters who are not out-and-out ripoffs of the Justice League. So I'm going to go ahead and take my thumb down, no longer spoiling stuff from Invincible. But then we have other characters of the Guardians of the Globe in this book, and then we add new characters to the team. We had characters who were already part of the team in Invincible, like Robot and Monster Girl, and I believe Britt. I think he was added to the team during the events of Invincible, and Britt, he was a character who, if I'm not mistaken, he actually predates the series Invincible. There were a few minis that Robert Kirkman wrote, and I don't know who drew those, but he was like a 100-year-old superhero. Like at one point, he actually says he's been a superhero for like 100 years, so he's crazy old, but I believe his stories actually came before Invincible, and then he is part of the Globe, but then they add some new characters to their team, and they are all a lot of fun. There is a dog, a French bulldog, who's actually from France. Her name is Le Brusier. I know I butchered that. I don't know how to speak French, but it's a French bulldog with superpowers. That's so cool. And there's an entire issue in one of these books that shows her going on her own little adventure. That was really awesome. We get to see Kaboomerang, who's from Australia. Some of these guys are a little bit, I don't want to say, they're not racially insensitive, because that's just more culturally, I guess, stereotypical is what I'm going for. If you're from Australia, you may see Kaboomerang and you may roll your eyes pretty hard because, oh great, it's an Australian superhero who uses boomerangs, how original. That kind of might bother you if you're from Australia. It didn't really bother me, but I could see how it would bother somebody because, I don't know, you don't see these American superheroes dressed up like a cheeseburger and they're really fat or something like that. I don't know. I don't know what people outside of America think of America, but I feel like Kirkman and crew could have done a little bit of a better job creating some of these international characters who aren't just, hey, Australia, what's Australia like? Well, there's boomerangs. Okay, we'll call this guy Kaboomerang. But then we got other characters like the Yeti. He's really fun. I really like him. He might be my second favorite new addition to the team. But we've got a lot of really interesting stuff going on here. Unfortunately, I'm missing a volume here featuring the Guardians of the Globe because there was that Guarding the Globe volume. I think there was a second volume of that that I do not have. But then there's this other series called Invincible Universe, which is more stories featuring the team. And I really like these stories. I like getting to see more of the Guardians of the Globe. We got to see quite a bit of them in Invincible, but it was nice getting to see them in their own book where Invincible isn't necessarily the focus of the book. He shows up a couple times here. We get to see a superhero wedding. Invincible is there. A lot of really fun stuff here. Just building and expanding the Invincible universe. I thought that was a lot of fun. It really got me back into Invincible. I wasn't necessarily out of Invincible, but reading these books really made me want to go and track down more Invincible books and read more stuff from Robert Kirkman's corner of the Image Comics universe. And then the last book that I read last week was Noble Causes Archives Volume 1, which is a really huge book. It's the first 12 issues of the ongoing Noble Causes series, as well as all the minis and one-shots that came before the ongoing series. So Noble Causes Archives Volume 1 in total is about 50 issues. No, not 50. It's about 25 issues total. And so it's a whole lot of comic there, but it's really fast-paced. It took me 2 days to read it off and on, and I wasn't even reading like the whole day. So really, if you just started from morning and just started reading, you could probably finish this book in one day if you didn't do anything else, like watch movies or, you know, go out to town or anything like that. But this is a superhero soap opera, and basically the premise is you've got this superhero family. It's kind of like if the Fantastic Four had been around for like 30 years or so, and Sue and Reed were post-middle age, and they had multiple kids who were all in their 20s and early 30s. That's basically the premise that we have here. And these guys are celebrities, very much like real-world celebrities. There's gossip columns about them. They're constantly doing TV interviews. The mom, Gaia, she is constantly trying to spin things in their favor because something will happen that's going to make them look bad, so they have to try and do some damage control to make it work in their favor. Most of these characters are wildly unlikable, and that is going to be the deciding factor on if you are going to enjoy this book and if you are going to want to keep reading, because there is a second archives of volume with more stories from these characters. But this is a soap opera, so a lot of this is just okay, and then something crazy happens with this character, and then a crazy twist happens that you didn't see coming. And a lot of times you will see people talk about how, like, for example, Chris Claremont's X-Men run from the 70s and 80s, how that did a lot of soap opera stuff. And that's kind of true, but it's not really a soap opera. This, Noble Causes, is actually a soap opera. Like, I feel like Jay Faerber is the writer's name, and he works with a whole bunch of artists in this book. But I feel like Faerber, he is just as influenced by The Young and the Restless as he is by the Fantastic Four or other superhero books. But this was a lot of fun. I really like getting to see his twist on the superhero family, because a lot of times you will see someone say, like, what makes the Avengers special is that they are a family. What makes the X-Men special is that they are a family. And usually they mean that in a very gushy, sweet, saccharine kind of way. Usually they don't mean that these family members are often stabbing each other in the back and they want to kill each other. And that's a lot of what we get here in Noble Causes. And it's saying that these guys are a literal family, but that's not necessarily a good thing here. And like I said, a lot of these characters are very unlikable here, so if you get into this, you may realize, hey, I don't actually like any of these people. There's a couple of them that are less unlikable than others, and then at the end of the book, some of the most unlikable characters get a few little short stories. I don't know how these short stories fit in with the other 12 or 25 issues of this book. I don't know if they were like backup stories or something, but some of these shorter stories, they actually do a little bit to make you feel a little bit sorry for some of these really unlikable characters. Characters like Celeste and Frost, who are extremely unlikable in the main meat of the book. They get some backstories that make us feel a little bit of sympathy for them a little bit. But anyway, there is one thing about this, other than these characters being just extremely unlikable, that I thought was just very poorly written about halfway through the book. So spoilers for the book. If you are interested in reading it, I guess I'll do the thumbs up thing again. I'm going to be spoiling Noble Causes as long as my thumb is up. So very early in the book, Race, he is one of the sons of Doc and Gaia Noble. He's like, okay, I'm going to be bringing my girlfriend home. This is very serious. I haven't told you anything about her. And then we find out that she is essentially a muggle. There's nothing exciting or super heroic about her. She's not from another dimension. She's not a time traveler or anything like that. She's just a normal human being. And then Race and Linda is her name, or Liz. I can't remember. It's Linda or Liz. They get married, and then like the very next issue, Race gets killed. And then the drama comes from Liz being part of the Noble family, even though her husband, the reason that she's there in the family, is now dead. And that's for about half of this book. And then about halfway through, she goes to another dimension where Race is still alive, and then she hugs him, and yay, it's happily ever after. And then from that point on, we just pretend like Race was never killed in the first place. It's like we are continuing all the subplots that we were building for the first half of this book, and we're pretending like those subplots were still going on in this alternate dimension where Race is still alive. It's very sloppily written. Basically, it seems like Jay Faerber said that he regretted killing off Race, and so he wants to find a way to bring back Race and also keep all of these soap opera subplots going in this alternate dimension. I'm going to go ahead and put my thumb down. It was just very poorly written. I think that there could have been another way that he could have handled that if he wanted to do that thing, bring that back, but I think that he did it in the worst possible way possible. But anyway, that's all that I read last week. A lot of superhero stuff, mostly from Image, I guess. I'm pretty sure all of this was from Image now that I think about it. But anyway, that is what I read last week. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back later this week with some other videos. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of your day. Catch you later.